G'day humans, welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas. And boy, there are a lot of dangerous ideas floating around about what it means to be a man. Whether you're going through the sewers of Andrew Tate videos online or looking at the horrendous violence inflicted on women in domestic violence situations, it's tricky to figure out how to be a good man. And today's guest, Osher Günsberg, is a thoughtful, beautiful, soulful man, a man I look up to, a man many Australians look up to. He's one of the most popular television personalities in Australia, having been the host of Australian Idol, the host of The Bachelor, the host of The Bachelorette, the host of The Masked Singer. He's the voice of Bondi Rescue, and he has his own podcast called Better Than Yesterday, which focuses largely on his struggles with mental health and what it means to be a good man, what it means to be a good person. He, like me, is the father of a young boy. And the two of us have been talking recently about the challenges of understanding the role of being a man in a world where we're expected to shoulder the sins of all men who have ever lived and the sins of men who currently live who might be violent, reprehensible individuals. How we carry the stain of supposedly toxic masculinity in balance with our own resilience and our own vulnerability. This is a beautiful chat. If you've ever been looking for an opportunity to upgrade your Substack to the paid version, I'd highly recommend it because the final half hour of this conversation is particularly powerful, I think, but the first hour is fantastic as well. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. The one and only Osher Günsberg.
When I did that fitness challenge for myself, I kind of fucked up my hunger satiety hormone release, and I couldn't tell when I was full.
Right.
For quite a while. It's a bit weird.
Meaning that you underate or overate?
Overate. Binge.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And so now I find intermittent fasting just the easiest form of caloric restriction. I can't stand small meals. I fucking hate it.
Me too.
I want to eat heaps.
Me too.
So I have absolutely no problem at all to just eat dinner.
Food, alcohol, drugs, sex. Why have one?
I could just eat dinner.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah.
It's totally fine.
No, I'm the same way. It's interesting, isn't it?
But,
if I need to lose weight, I just don't eat until 1 or 2 in the afternoon.
Right. I go all the way to dinner, but then what happens is about a month is as long because essentially if you don't then go back to regular caloric intake, your set point doesn't change.
Right.
So your set point you need to very slowly over time. The science
I've heard
behind
this. I know.
The science.
It seems arduous.
Your friends at CSIRO who, I don't know, invented Wi-Fi and stuff.
Yeah. I pretty much invented Wi-Fi.
Pardon?
I pretty much invented Wi-Fi. I'll take credit for it.
I spoke to one of the guys who invented Wi-Fi.
Really?
Yeah.
An Aussie?
Yeah.
We like to take credit for things, but I'm always skeptical.
We did, though.
We invented Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Australia.
Yeah.
Did we?
Your CSIRO.
My CSIRO. My CSIRO.
The same one that eradicated prickly pear, and the same one that also went cane toads. That's what we should do.
I think prickly pear and inventing Wi-Fi, different levels of success,
mate,
different levels of importance globally.
I did a whole fucking podcast on how I drew a direct line between the red of the redcoats,
right,
to the invention of Wi-Fi.
Communism.
No.
What are the redcoats?
The redcoats. The redcoats are coming. The British Army. The colour of
the British Army. Oh, right. Okay.
They needed a lot of dye.
Is that right?
To make, yes. And the Brazilians had the Portuguese.
But when is this happening? Wi-Fi was only invented 3 minutes ago. The redcoats needed dye in the 1780s.
So what they did is they, on the way to Australia, they snuck in and they stole some fucking prickly pear because the cochineal bug only grows on prickly pear. And when you crush up the cochineal bug, that's the red that you see.
Okay.
And it only grows on prickly pear. So to secure a supply of this shit, they went, we'll plant it down in Australia. Let's fucking go. And they did.
Right.
And they planted it here with the idea of like securing and sourcing their own supplies so they could go to war and not have to worry about having the wrong color jacket so people wouldn't get shot. And then, cut to the 20s or so when prickly pear was advancing at like half a kilometre or a kilometre a year.
Because it's an agricultural pest.
Terrible
pest.
Laying waste
it takes over all the farms.
Farms, native habitat, you name it, it's fucked.
They probably didn't give a shit about native habitat.
And so the CSIRO was founded, basically. The first thing they did was they brought in the Cactoblastus cantorum moth, which...
I can't believe you know the Latin name for the moth that was brought in to attack the plant that was
have a
bedeviling
brain. Have a
Australia.
weird brain.
It's like my son who knows everything about Pokemon, but nothing about the real world.
And so it was with this success and the idea that, science, important. We can have a lot of economic success if we lean into choices made and driven by scientific results.
What does CSIRO stand for?
Commonwealth Scientific something
Innovation
Research Organisation.
Organization.
And head to all the way through to the mid-70s when, Wi-Fi. Because Wi-Fi is a construction of a few different things, but we were the ones, it was John O'Donnell, I can't remember his name, we spoke to him. He worked in, and there's it's a long story, there's a direct line with black holes, listening for black holes to Wi-Fi, because it's the echoes that were making it impossible to work. Because how can you, if a 1 and a 0 is traveling from me to you, but it bounces off that wall, how are you going to know which one arrived first?
Okay.
So the packet arrives in all jumbles.
Right.
So the trick was, much like a Jean-Michel Jarre record, when you hit the arpeggio, they would fire them at different frequencies.
Right.
So you have this arpeggio, essentially, of frequencies.
You've lost me completely. I have no idea what you're talking about. Well, how do we get to Jean-Michel Jarre and a Sonne Lumière exposition
Wi-Fi
in Paris? But wait, so you send them in different packet. Now I'm interested. So you're sending information, but you don't know, but the information comes misordered because it bounces off other things.
If it's all at the same frequency.
And what's this? Oh, I see. You put them on different layers, essentially.
And using the fast Fourier transforms that they discovered while they were listening for black holes from like Stephen Hawking's theory, and they actually heard the echoes of ancient black holes using this stuff to deciphering radio telescope data. They used the same thing and as a broadcast to create Wi-Fi. And this is why you can now scroll TikTok.
Well, Osher, it's been lovely having you here. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really enjoyed this informative session about Wi-Fi.
And that's just Wednesday.
That's just
that's Thursday. It's Thursday.
What's the topic on Thursday?
That's just Thursday. That's just today.
Yeah. It is Thursday, isn't it? I'm glad someone knows the day of the week. Well,
thanks for having me.
It's lovely to have you back on the program. Now I just want to talk about Wi-Fi the whole time because sometimes I feel like we take undue credit for things that maybe we had some small role in.
Like Crowded House, for example.
Like Crowded House, like Russell Crowe, even Mel Gibson, Born in America. Yeah. You know, Australians love things that they can claim as Australian.
But we also create things and then just like...
So why didn't the redcoats, if it was so hard, if they needed to find an exotic bug to crush down to create the red dye, why didn't they just go, it's not red anymore. It's just now it's beige.
Fuck if I know, mate. I don't know. It's a brand, though. It's a solid brand. It's like the Big M. It's like the Macca's brand. It's a solid brand.
Is it?
The red coats. You see a tall ship full of red coats, you're fucked. You know things are bad.
Yeah.
You're about to get a flag stuck in you, and you're going to have to learn another language and know cricket. Like, it's going to be bad times.
Yeah, the cricket would upset me.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So how's The Bachelor going? How's Masked Singer? How's Australian Idol? All going good? Is there any news I need to know about your life, Osher, since we last
only that my basement flooded and I needed my house is currently being kept dry by a 12-volt marine bilge pump connected to a battery that my son and I got from
CSIRO. They invented the bilge pump.
Probably. I just wrote this in an email to someone. Like I got into radio. I spent 32 years working and perfecting and pursuing mastery of an industry which is going through a rapid contraction and correction and all kinds of things. So I have this very specific set of skills which previously added a huge amount of value to people who owned, I don't know, broadcast licenses and such. And now I don't know quite what to do.
It is funny, isn't it, being a specialist in a field that then suddenly has much less need for specialists. Although the field as a whole still needs the specialists. It's just that the particular financial model of the big mainstream legacy media companies doesn't, because people really only still watch, I mean, with the exception of streaming services, they watch a lot of, Netflix and Apple Plus and whatever. But on regular television, they just watch sport and occasionally a bit of news and reality television, but obviously not enough reality television for your liking.
Not for my liking. All markets shift, all markets change. Entropy is one of the laws of thermodynamics. You can't ignore it.
Back to your CSIRO.
It's true, though.
Brain.
It's true.
I was talking to Mark Burris on his podcast, which people should listen to. And no, I'm overtly doing it. I'm not dropping a name. I'm overtly directing people to Straight Talk with Mark Bouris, because Mark was the Donald Trump of Australia on The Apprentice in Australia, on The Australian Apprentice. He's a multimillionaire and a very successful and smart guy. And he has a podcast. And you just did an episode of his podcast, which is yet to be released. Yeah. But the one that I did just came out, which people should listen to if they want to hear an interview with me. But one of the things that we were talking about is, it's very important when you're a young person to try to lean into whatever you're good at.
Yeah.
There aren't very many jobs necessarily for the thing that you might be good at. Like for me, it was talking. And, how many times have you opened up a newspaper or like gone on to, jobs classifieds and seen radio host, primetime radio host wanted. It doesn't work that way. There aren't a lot of those jobs.
No, when we did the news show, which you gratefully came and did, I would often preface the show by saying, no one's going to come down my front path, knock on my door and say, that late night satirical news show that you wanted to host? We've got the studio ready. Audience is there.
That's right.
Can you come tonight?
You sort of we're live at 10:30.
But this got to make it.
This is one of the things that I love about you and that I admire about you is that you could see in advance that the writing was eventually going to be on the wall. And when I say that I admire it about you, it's I'm also saying I admire it about myself. Like we put in place certain hedges that would mean that we're not immediately destitute the moment the powers that be, so you do your live satirical news improv show whenever you can, which is hilarious, which I've been part of. What else?
I have the podcast, which is going rather well. We go 3 times a week since 2013, which is rather lovely to do. And
did the CSIRO invent that podcast in 2013? Because that was pre-podcasts, really.
No, but there is an entire podcast about that CSIRO topic because I was just got really fascinated with it and I ended up talking about it. I also write a lot and I made a book and I'm making more books and such.
You made a book?
Yeah, I wrote a book.
It's an interesting phraseology.
There's Charlie Clausen who I'm working on another project with Charlie and his wife Gemma. We're developing a documentary and they're based upon true events that happen here in Sydney. Also like a podcast and a scripted we're developing out of that. It's been years.
But what true events that happen in Sydney?
We are developing up the I'll tell you later because
you don't. I'll tell you later
because Charlie and I worked on something else together, and we were gazumped at the last moment by a parallel project who had also seen this moment, and they got in I think like 3 weeks or 4 weeks before us on the funding. Right. Similarly.
So you're doing a show about Scott Morrison taking a giant dump in the Macca's toilet. Was that what it was?
No, I think that's Dan Leitch doing that one.
Oh, okay.
No. But Charlie has this great line. He said, in our industry, it's a fast yes or a slow no.
Yeah.
And the yeses were starting to slow down.
Yeah.
And I was like, got it. All right. So I started, and it's fine. My old manager, John Ferriter, he's passed away now, but he's incredibly
Did John die?
Yeah, John died.
When did John die?
Oh, a couple of years back.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple of years back now. He's an amazing guy.
Yeah, he was a legend of Australian entertainment.
John Ferriter, No, we're talking about 2 different people.
No, we're not.
Sorry.
The manager.
The American guy.
John Ferriter.
Yeah.
Is he American?
Yes.
Shows how much I know.
It's okay. That'll make it cut.
He was a legend of managing. Everyone I know who he managed was Australian, I've never met the guy.
Right. He was the one who he kind of was a pioneer of packaging when it came to, so here's this format. Right. So I've got this producer, this host, this musical director who are all my clients. I will put them all together to this format and then take this format with this unbelievable team to the network and go, if you want to say no to it, you can, but I'm taking it over there next week. So he was the first kind of person to package things up like that. He's very clever. But he used to say, unless you host the 6 o'clock news, one day your show is going to get cancelled. So even when you book that big show, you've got to put time every week to figuring out what you're going to do when that day comes.
Yeah. And even if you host the 6 o'clock news, you're not going to host it forever. The show will exist.
Yeah. So maybe. I took that on board because I had not done that. And when the first time Australian Idol happened in Australia, when that ended, I was quite surprised. I didn't know what the fuck to do. This time around, I was like, right, I have to put some effort in here. And so, yeah, I've been creating and but I really quite enjoy the act of creation, the act of making formats, the act of writing and pitching and things like this, because that gives me something to do and a way to test hypotheses and a way to sharpen the blade and keep the blade sharp. And then if you pitch it and people pass, that's fine. It goes on the shelf. You start the process again. And then when you bump into someone who goes such and such, blah, 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 you get to go, actually, I've got a fully functioning satirical news show with a cast of team and a writing and a showrunner and everything. Maybe we could help you fill that.
Yeah.
Because you're ready.
Peter Hellier was on the show, which will probably be released very shortly if you're listening to this, or may just have dropped. A great Australian comedian and TV personality.
God, you're good with your forward and backward selves like this guy. That's what ABC training will give you.
He was saying,
listen to cross promo. Just ABC. Always be contenting. That's what ABC stands for. Just promo, so good.
You know, when you were talking about having a skill set, you know, I can't do many things very well. This is what I do. This is the only thing I know how to do.
James Matheson once said, he used to say, it's like, we just read out loud for a living.
Yeah.
You're not wrong, Jimmy.
So Peter was saying that because he had a sitcom that he got up on Channel 10, right, which he wrote and which he created. Well, yeah. And I said, how did that come about? And he said he was sitting, he was at a luncheon, at a social lunch, and sitting next to Beverly McGarvey, who runs Channel 10, one of the networks here. And she just said to him, have you got any ideas? You know, we're thinking about sitcoms. And he had it ready to go. He had the one-pager ready. He had everything. He was like, absolutely, I know what it is. I'll send it to you. And so it makes her life easier, doesn't it? Instead of commissioning 7 million things, she's like, I like Pete, and here's a show that he wants to do. That's easy. Done.
If you can solve someone else's problem, then you're adding value already.
This is good life lesson for anyone who's in a creative industry that involves some form of auditioning, whether that's music or acting or hosting. Dad always said that when you're going into an audition, because Dad was an actor, a successful actor in Australia, Henri, and he would always say, remember, when you go into an audition, they're the ones with the problem.
Yeah.
Not you. You already don't have the job.
Yeah.
So worst case scenario is just baseline. It's where you are already.
You've already got to know.
They have a show, which they don't have a host for, or they don't have, they're looking for a solution.
Yeah.
So help them solve their problem. Don't go in with an attitude of they have all the power and I'm the one who has to.
Please like me.
Yeah, please like me. Exactly. Yeah. That's right. Just solve their problem for them.
That is, I did go through my first round of my career like that, with the I'm not worthy, and not in the nice Wayne's World way, but in the I don't belong here kind of way. And I needed to have it all go away and to realize, I can actually have worth here, and I can work on that worth and be sure that I can add value whenever I come along and be a part of your project. And that's a much better way to be.
Yeah. And what you were saying about, like, you put the stuff together and then it either gets up or it doesn't. And if it doesn't get up, then you go back to the drawing board and you start putting something else together.
Yeah. But either way, you gain something out of it, though.
Yeah, but a lot of people find that process, and I may be talking about myself here, somewhat demoralizing and exhausting and arduous and frustrating. And yet, the job of the creative is basically to continue to do that and to continue to throw shit at the wall until some of it sticks.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy the process of development?
Very much. I very much enjoy it, because I have it might be frustrating, and it may bother me that, things that I'm creating aren't, I'm the right guy with the right idea at the wrong time sometimes, or I'm the wrong guy with the right idea at the right time. Like, whatever, that's also happened. It's easier to do that than to have this in my head going, you fucking get off your phone. You should be writing this thing. You should But that's the other thing John used to say. You're the only one who knows how hard you work to make your dreams come true. And he's right, because I'm the only one. If I didn't get a gig or whatever, I can say, they went with someone else. They went with, that guy. And you go, I know him. He's a good bloke. Yeah, he is, isn't he? Oh, well. Okay, good night. See you, bye. And I'm the one that lies in bed going, I fucking phoned it in, man. I didn't prep. I didn't get my shit together. I'm the one. And I know what I did or did not do. If I've done everything, I've left nothing on the table, then I can sleep. But if not, I'm like, yeah, fuck that.
Another piece of great Henry Zepp's wisdom was, after you've done something successful and you've done it successfully and everyone's congratulating you, nobody asks how long it took.
Nope.
They just see the success. They just think, they don't, the fact that you spent 4 years of blood, sweat and tears hammering it out, or that,
Oh, no. Did you end up getting any of those turtlenecks? He had some fucking great turtlenecks.
A turtleneck sweater?
Yeah.
Like a skivvy, as we would call it.
Yeah. It's some really good ones.
My father, he did have a good turtleneck.
Really? Did you get any
He's still alive, so I mean, he's allowed
but
to.
I'm sure there's some jackets and stuff in a box.
Yeah, I'm sure there are.
Big lapels, he knew what he was doing.
The turtleneck and the jacket.
Mate,
it's true.
He knew
a
what he was
black
doing.
turtleneck. Very Steve Jobs of him, actually. A black turtleneck, a jacket with 1980s shoulder pads.
That's right.
1980s executive woman shoulder pads.
Hey, he was a pioneer.
He was. He was. Now, one of the things that you do on your show wonderfully is talk to people about mental health in a kind of a roundabout way, people's personal journeys, what is fulfilling to them, what is corrosive to their own aspirations. And we've just been coming out of a period where there's a lot of conversation around the mental health of young males in particular. There's a lot of conversation around the violence of males and how we should talk about that. What are your insights into this moment?
Well, I was listening to you talk about it in a gym in Canberra.
I wasn't in any gym in Canberra.
No, you were in my headphones.
It wasn't me.
I had my hearing aids in today, but I had my headphones in on that day. Okay. And I'm listening to you talk about it. I'm listening to you. You're right up there with the stats, and the statistics, frankly, were I was confronted by the statistics that you brought up in that episode.
In what way? And this was a monologue that I did, which I think was called The Problem with the Conversation About Male Violence, which people can go back and listen to.
And I was thinking a bit like, and this is why I'm very glad that you do what you do, and I take a lot of inspiration from you, but I'm not anywhere near as well equipped to do what you do as well as you do it.
No, thank you.
Because you've got a young son, I've got a young son, and I am at the same time profoundly and terribly sad and afraid of what can happen to my wife or my stepdaughter who's 20. I hold this constant fear with me. And then when you talk about the likelihood that my little boy will be a victim of male on male violence or male on male homicide, and the difference in that likelihood, it shook me to my core, right? And
just to tease that out, if you're just talking about homicide, because so much of the conversation is around, I mean, I was literally just driving back from Avalon the other day, and as you're going around the bends in the northern beaches of Sydney, there's a huge sign that someone's hand painted saying, "Stop killing women." Mm-hmm. That's what it says. Stop killing women. Men need to stop killing women. And so the point I was just making is that you're more than twice as likely as a man to be killed by another man than a woman. In terms of domestic violence and domestic manipulation and abuse, then of course women get the short end of the straw there. But in terms of being afraid of walking to your car at night and someone just accosting you and killing you, you're more than twice as likely to be your son is more than twice as likely to be a victim of that than your daughter.
Yeah. And that is, and I wondered, like, yes, the person that painted that sign has a really valid point that I wholeheartedly agree with.
It's not a terribly insightful point. I think the number of people who would object to the message of that sign, or who would read that sign and go, wait a second, stop killing them. I thought
what next?
I thought we were supposed to kill more women. Isn't it good? Isn't killing women good? I thought, until I saw the sign, I didn't realize. Thank you for writing the sign and putting it up there. Well, I didn't realize.
Well, I understand
this was bad.
I understand that somebody getting into action is a good way of getting uncomfortable feelings out of your body, and that involves going to a protest or creating a sign or doing something, some form of action to express these feelings of, I don't like this at all, I have to do something. That is something that person did. I hope it made them feel better. I, at the same time, wonder though if we might benefit from perhaps asking a different question. And that might be, for example, I mean, I think what's the most dangerous man you can think of? Most dangerous man I can think of is a man who's by himself and a man who's desperate. Yes, violence is never the fucking answer. Yet, for many people, it is the best idea they've got at that point in time. And that's a really terrifying thing, all right?
Well, is it the best idea they've got at the time? I mean, do even they think that the violence is the best idea they've got at the time?
Are you writing in shorthand like you've gone to some sort of fucking journalism cadet school?
No, I just wrote in messy phone call to remind me to cut out the fact that you just took a phone call.
Oh, okay then. I thought it was nice. I thought it humanizes us. And she even said hello to you.
No, that's great, but I'm not going to leave it in. The listener doesn't care that you took a phone call from your wife. I don't care that you took a phone call from your wife, but the listener doesn't need it.
All right. Okay.
But so you were saying that
like I wonder,
it might be the wrong question.
I wonder if sometimes if we're not getting the answer that we want, and in this case the answer is what the person who made that sign is looking for, why are men killing women? Which is a very valid question. Sometimes if we're not getting the answer that we want, perhaps sometimes the question, or maybe we're looking at the wrong thing. And it's important to ask lots of questions.
Well, what should we be looking at?
I don't know. I'm not a sociologist. However, I wonder, asking, like, is there, I wonder, like, you know, we all have an implicit bias. I wonder if there's a subconscious thing inside of me, and I'd like to think that I'm not going to use the W word, but I like to think I'm a fairly empathetic person who likes.
What's the W word?
It rhymes with bloke.
Woke.
I'd like to think that I am an open-minded person who thinks about the world and appreciates everybody's humanity. Yet I also know that there are implicit biases within me that have been soaked into my brain through cultural conditioning and society and stuff like this from when I was quite little, and that those things do exist. I wonder if similarly there's a subconscious thing inside of me that says, hang on a sec, perhaps maybe asking a man to, like, asking me to care more for someone else's daughter than my own son, who's twice as likely to, you know, be victim to this. I don't know if that's going to inspire the action. However, if we ask the question of, like, well, what about just violence in general? What about what if we asked about the use of people resorting to violence in general?
But wouldn't the person who is specifically concerned about violence against women say the reason why you need to care is not because you should care less about the risk to your son, but that you should care more about the possibility of your son becoming a perpetrator of violence, because he is way more likely to be a perpetrator of violence than a female?
Josh, I sit there there's a very large park near our home, and one of those, like, 7 playgrounds in there, and one of them sometimes you're teeming.
Is that what it's like to be rich, to live next to a park where there are 7 playgrounds? Is that bachelor money?
Ask a rich person. I'm currently self-employed.
I am. Okay.
Define rich.
Yeah. Hosting multiple smash hit reality television shows.
I'm sure Mark Boris's State of Origin group chat he was telling me about last night is full of people way richer than he is, as far as he's concerned. Well, look, there's a like, so most
one of the 7 playgrounds that your nanny was taking the kids to, right? Yeah.
We live within 5 kilometres of Centennial Park in Sydney, which is one of the great parks of the world.
Yep.
And it is beautiful. And there's a playground there where on a weekend there will be 200 kids just heaving and teeming all over this incredible playground. And you look at it, and you look at the young boys. None of them are much older than 6. And you think, statistically, 20 years from now, one of you is going to think, I know what to do now. Punch her in the face. And that's fucking horrible to think about that my son might become a perpetrator, that my son might become a victim. Like, nobody wants their son to do that. Nobody. And that itself is frightening, is absolutely frightening. And the idea that I think there's someone in my life who, Maggie Dent came on the show, and I let them know, because we're working on something else together. I said, Maggie Dent comes, I find her a bit gendered. I was like,
she's a parenting expert, perhaps.
Well, she is. She's
parenting expert.
Yeah, she's
Australia.
Extraordinarily good and backed in science, and I really like her.
Love her.
And I kind of I see where she comes from, because if you can help young boys deal with their emotions.
Oh, this person was critical of Maggie because Maggie focuses too much on young boys.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm like, but if you focus on young boys and help young boys be okay with frustration and be okay with not getting the thing they want right now and feel okay about themselves that they don't need an external validation, before the age of 5, you've gone a long way to when they're 25 doing something real fucking dumb that could change their life or the lives of everybody around them forever.
What was your experience of masculinity and role models when you were a kid? I mean, I remember growing up in a very progressive neighborhood of Sydney and I left primary school with a very firm idea, thanks to one aggressively feminist teacher in particular, that women don't enjoy sex. Girls don't want sex, that you should never seek out sex, that you should only accept it when it comes to you, and that you need to respect. This was her way of trying to get young boys to respect girls' boundaries as they grew up. I mean, this was not a kindergarten lesson. This would have been in year 6. But that,
so I've done some field work, and in the research that I've done, I would say that
well, they
a
love
cohort
sex
of
with
women
you.
that I've been with, well,
They love
do.
sex with Osher. Of course they do. This is the pinnacle of their lives. So they get to have sex with Osher.
Hardly, but I'd like to think this.
But that was the milieu. That was the sort of consensus. So my understanding of masculinity was really quite, I think, lukewarm and
mine was
tepid.
I went to an all boys private school in Brisbane, which was for the sons of the landed gentry and their doctors and lawyers. My parents were the doctor part of that. And
were there 7 playgrounds?
No, just one. And the only woman that wasn't my mum in my life was my accounting teacher. And I left that school with a very strange view of women.
Right.
That was a bumpy landing into the world once I started
of the ladies.
Once I started working in professional environments, purely because of the osmosis of the attitudes that I had never sought to question.
Would you say they were retrograde?
I am very happy to say that, in the words of the man that guides me on my sobriety journey, the good news is I get to live the rest of my life not being that guy anymore. And, it was through the very deep and patient actions of, probably my first proper live-in girlfriend. We were together for about 7 years, going, no, you can't actually do that. It's not okay. You got to look women in the eye when you speak. Oh, okay. I just didn't. I'm one of 4 boys. I didn't really have any women really in my life, and that was an issue. But
could you look men in the eyes?
I was pretty jumpy, but I was a pretty jumpy kid. But I had a strange view of women's role in the world until I was,
or perhaps not that strange in terms of what people have tended to believe throughout history. I mean, that was the dominant view, presumably, a kind of a vaguely sexist.
It was 80s Queensland.
Just a sexist, misogynistic idea that there.
It was 80s Queensland, and I consumed a lot of pop culture that underwrote a lot of that.
Yeah,
so I didn't question. That was all. There's a great Australian drama that was filmed on Tangalooma, which is a resort on Moreton Island off of Brisbane called Holiday Island, and I think it's not Harold, the other one from Neighbours, is in the opening credits slapping a girl on the ass in the opening credits of Holiday Island.
Right.
And away it went. It was a Crawford production or something.
Good for him.
And but that was tickety boo, off you go.
Well, it was a very nice ass.
See you at the Logies.
Could you
see you at the Logies, buddy?
Could you blame him for resisting
and that was,
that ass?
It's that's where the line was at the time. And thankfully that we are aware that the line is in a different place now. Yet,
right. But so the only way the line gets into a different place is by people shouting that the line's in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Right. And so people shouted for a long time and said, the line's in the wrong place. We're not going to cop this anymore. We're not going to cop having our asses slapped in the workplace. We're not going to cop the level of violence against women. We're not going to cop police turning a blind eye to domestic violence. We're not going to cop police implicitly blaming the victim when a sex worker gets murdered or something, or raped because, she was probably asking for it. Like, these are the new norms that we have to enforce. How do you do that without also doing the thing that you seem to be uncomfortable with, which is, I don't know, what is it? Some kind of a group demonization of men, or a narrative about male violence that is disempowering to your son.
I don't agree with the last thing. That's not what I think at all. I'm just asking the question of, like, perhaps if we could hold this idea that what's happening at the moment is really fucking terrible and agree this to be true, and then maybe perhaps ask some questions about what are some other ways we might be able to get to a outcome where this stops happening. That isn't, you need to do better, Josh, because you do amazing. I don't know, what more can you do? You do incredible, right? The people that are in my life, that are in my cohort, the people that I am vaguely a group chat away from, they're all fucking amazing people. And so I wonder, so the way I'll get to it is this. It's like, I haven't eaten meat in a long time, like mid-90s, all right? I tend not to do any vegan stuff, all right, out publicly, because I tend to think that the messaging shoots himself in the foot, all right? You murdered that pig. Like, that's not going to get someone to change their mind, because it's a personal identity thing, all right? And so I don't think it really does the job. And when I listen to the way you talk about any kind of progressive idea, you can almost find a point where in the prosecution of that progressive idea and why it should change, there's a shaming or something element to it to try to get the person to change their mind, that if it is, if you get a person, if you just get it at the wrong angle, it bounces off their self-identity and then they galvanize and you never get them ever. And that I think it might be that's something I think to consider in trying to solve this problem.
That's a good way of putting it, the bouncing off their identity, because I think sometimes when blokes have this conversations that even attempt to talk about this kind of area, it will bounce off the identity of the woman who wrote that placard saying stop killing women, right? Because she'll be like, well, of course a couple of blokes are having a conversation.
Yeah, she's right.
About this. Yeah. Well, she may not be right, but it will land for her not as a constructive attempt to wrestle with a complicated issue that we need to address, but as defensive posturing by men who refuse to take responsibility. And it's not that. So she's not right about that. When we think about our sons, what we all want is for young males to grow up to be non-violent, but to still find a way of expressing their masculinity that isn't emasculated, that isn't castrated, and that has traditional values of masculinity in the best sense, right? That takes responsibility for community, that tries to achieve things in the world, that tries to provide for people. And I guess the worry is that if it becomes the responsibility of your and my little boys to shoulder the kind of moral albatross of the actions of males they've never met who did things they can't imagine doing, maybe it impedes their ability to grasp and see a positive vision of masculinity because they feel so suppressed and sort of victim blamed.
And there's a larger question around it. I sat on a panel with your husband at the All About Women festival. And
he loved that. This was at the Opera House, and they had it's a big women's festival, and it was an all-male panel.
We had about 300 people, 200 people in the room.
Great.
And
Jamila.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah, she's great. I love
very, very good at what she does. Yeah. And I told her, so I was like, this is hard to do because I've done it 1,000 times. And you did it very, very
Jamila Rizvi.
She's very good at it.
Shout out.
And I was talking, I raised the point I'm about to raise, and I'll tell you the reaction that I got afterwards, in that and it's funny because one of my dear mates is one of the Australian dads that we see in all the ads. All right. He's not dumb fat dad though. He's the only one who's not dumb fat dad.
Okay.
But every other ad is dumb fat dad.
Yeah.
I forgot the fucking thing.
Yeah.
Go Kevin. Hose into the fucking whatever, fucking insurance is on fire, whatever.
Right. It's there's a Homer Simpson version of masculinity.
And if that's what we're expecting of our, women have stopped being Rita the Eater for a long time.
Right.
But man, not moved.
Rita the Eater Eater was an old Australian ad.
It was a margarine
So you mean
ad.
a chirpy homemaker?
You ought to be congratulated.
Yeah.
You got the good margarine.
You are aware that a minority of our listeners and viewers are in Australia. No one knows what you're talking about.
That's fine. Everyone knows the trope of you've done a good housewife and you've baked a great casserole.
Yes.
Fuck,
yes.
you win. Good on
Yeah,
you, love.
yeah.
Now be quiet.
A very conventional 1950s
Yeah.
understanding
And
of the
and we
gender
have,
breakdown.
because of the aforementioned, line pushing, that has not been in advertising for a long time.
No.
Yet the ads that you'll see today, last night during State of Origin, and that is the dad that we expect.
Yeah.
That is what we'll get. That's the standard we're setting. It's a problem. It is a real problem when the greatest dad on Australian, if not the world's television, is a blue dog. Bandit
That's
Hero
true.
is the greatest Australian dad there is.
Yeah, and that was an explicit decision by the creators of
Absolutely.
that show to model a good version of
Yeah.
masculinity and
Truly.
of being a good dad.
If
Yeah,
you-
because
you
there's
can't-
so much that isn't.
You can't do better than Bandit Healer.
Yeah.
You really cannot.
Yeah, it's
And-
all Peter Griffin
And honestly, I listen to a lot of different podcasts, but I listen to Jocko Willink quite a bit. He is a Navy SEAL Bandit Healer. When you listen to the way he talks about accepting responsibility, understanding empathy, trying to avoid any kind of violence or conflict, even this is like a trained killer,
Yeah.
right? You're like, holy shit,
Well, this is the thing. I mean, because we've done such a bad job of finding a way to talk about the positive attributes of masculinity, because we have felt like that could in some way be perceived as detracting from feminism or detracting from the desire for equal rights for women or downplaying violence against women or something. We have spent the past couple of decades sort of, I think, emasculating men in the same way that my primary school teacher accidentally did by trying to get us to not be rapey, but as a result, just making us feel like we didn't have a dick.
Are you saying she turned you gay?
She turned me gay, man. I was so straight up
You were
until
straight up until that
class.
point?
And it was ridiculous. I walked out of that class, I was like, man, dick, not boobs. What have I been doing? This is some idiot.
I joke because, I guarantee you, what, you were 5, 4 when you figured it out?
No, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah,
because
right.
my sexuality is much more nebulous. I could
Right.
imagine being in an alternate life, having fallen in love with a woman.
Yeah,
and I can imagine that having happened. And I
Right.
had long and loving relationships with girls in my teens. For me, it was more about For me, I fell in love. I found myself falling in love much more intensely with a certain handful of guys than I ever had with girls. But it wasn't. I wasn't one of those. I wasn't like my husband, who, the moment he was out of the womb, boom, he was flaming.
Gold star. That's another deep cut for those.
But because we've done a not very good job of articulating a vision of masculinity. Where were we?
I was talking
Bandit?
about the idea of making, if we expect
Jocko.
men,
Yeah.
we expect men to be, if that's what we're expecting of men, that's the standard we're setting. That's the highest that we'll expect them to, and that's the highest that men will rise to. And then making them wrong for not being anything better than that. It's not great.
Right. I was just going to go down the alternative
Jocko line?
media ecosystem as well.
Yeah.
Because the mainstream media doesn't have great visions of masculinity. It's either the doofus dad or, the politically correct, extremely sensitive new age guy. People like Jocko and Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson now have a platform in which they're speaking to young men in ways that really resonate, but because we're all governed by sociopathic algorithms that nudge us into ever more, extreme content, because that's where the engagement lies, that also becomes I don't want to say a sort of a pathway, but it becomes a bit of a gateway to much more toxic versions of masculinity,
I've
like
seen,
Andrew Tate and
oh
all
my
that
God.
nonsense.
Getting ready for podcasts and stuff, I'll watch videos and see if I can do stuff so I don't know what the fuck my algorithm's telling me, but if I see 12 female journalists owned by something, what?
Yeah.
I don't want to watch this.
No.
Well, don't feed me this, YouTube.
No, and there seems to be, I think, a misconception amongst some, women's rights people or some people who are very agitated about feminism, that phenomena like Andrew Tate are indicative of something intrinsic to masculinity, and this is why we need to fight harder and shout louder that men need to stop killing women. I actually think they've got it ass backwards, that the shouting too loudly about men as a whole need to stop killing women makes young men feel like young peaceful men, that is, who don't want to kill women and who don't want to be violent towards women, feel like they're being unfairly maligned. It pings off their identity, like you were saying before. It makes them more keen on playing the identity game. If they're like, oh, is that the game we're playing? That like women have to be part of the sisterhood? Well, then I guess guys have to be part of the brotherhood, don't we? And Andrew Tate becomes this perverted, like horrendous kind of offshoot dark place that I actually don't think would have the currency that he does if we'd all been a little bit less judgy of men as a cohort, as a group.
I understand where you're coming from. When I spoke about making space for men to be better and expecting better of men and displaying men in a better way on this panel with Sean, it was actually quite a lovely message I got. Someone sent me a message going, I saw your thing. I was really fucking confronted by it. I was really confronted that I was being asked to make space for men. If I understand what you like, it is really, really hard. Like there's a lot of particularly difficult problems in our world right now, and making space for the part that we don't necessarily agree with is an important part of getting to a place that we can both be. And when it comes to violence in our community, my God, I don't know about you, but from the age of 14, I've been terrified. And it's interesting because I remember the first time I read something about this, walking from the train station with my keys in my hand as a group of men passed me by. I'm like, that's every night coming home when I was 14, 15. Like, don't be big, be small, don't make yourself a target. Like, because I knew how quickly it could, what you're looking at, like, that's it. What am I looking at? I'm looking at me running as fast as I fucking can away from you guys. That's what I'm doing. Because the threat of really terrifying violence has always been there for me. And I feel it's important to recognize that that is a real thing. And it's not like the idea that I walk through the world never worrying. I maybe worry less as I have learned more about how to move through the world, but I certainly don't walk through the world not worrying. I'm always aware. It's just become a part of who I am. Like, okay, that guy there, okay, that doorway there. I'm always like that, have been for a long time. And I don't think I'm alone in this way, but I certainly don't want Wolfie to grow up in any way thinking that, I can't express myself fully as my, who I am because it's making another person uncomfortable. If he's hurting them, that's a different story. But for him to be, proudly and wonderfully being the young fella that he is, that's part of who he is. That's his identity. I'm not okay with even saying that word out loud. I guess what I'm trying to say.
What, identity?
Yeah, I don't like it.
Well, I keep saying, like, if you want to turn the volume up on people's identities, just look at all the cultures that have done that and tell me that they're better than the ones that have strived towards downplaying identities. Like, civil war is what you get when people really focus on their identities. It's probably a good thing to maybe not want to be a bunch of warring tribes fighting over a finite
I'd like
pie.
to think we're not going to get there in this country. I hope we don't. Can't say the same for some other countries.
So if your experience of being a young male was that you were moving through the world basically frightened of other young males, what lands for you when you hear someone say, men just don't understand because when women move through the world, they have to live in constant fear of men?
Oh man, I wouldn't know what those people are thinking, but I can imagine that it is. I think there may be some clearing my throat and qualifying everything here, Josh. I'm so worried to speak, even in your presence. It might be. I don't know. I would say that ultimately this person is appealing to another party to have some empathy for their experience. And that experience is absolutely valid, without a doubt. After a shoot, wherever we are, I'm sure you've done the same, walking my team back to their cars. That's just what you do. All right. Wherever the city you are in the world, doesn't matter. That's just kind of what you do, because you know that they are also at risk and the three of us together will be okay. And you would want that empathy to be extended to you, yet it's not a zero-sum thing. Like, yes, you want this empathy to be extended to you, but are you able to then extend this empathy to understand, like, maybe it is not only my experience. Maybe there are men in the world who also have this thing. I think I have learned to move through the world a little better lately. There was a...
Do you mean more fearlessly?
No, I would say there was a study done, I think, in the 60s or 70s where they showed, back when Times Square was like the deuce that David, I think,
when it was disgusting and violent.
It was horrible, right?
Yeah.
And basically it was like muggers who were in prison for having mugged people in Times Square. And they showed them footage of people walking, but only filmed from the waist down. And these guys went, yep, nah, easy. No, wouldn't go near them. Yes. They could tell by their gait.
I see.
As if they were going to be an easy target. So there's something that I don't know. I didn't do it deliberately. There's something I've figured out as I've moved through the world that...
Walk with a bit more heft.
I don't know what it is, but it's not to say that...
I certainly walk differently when I'm alone at night than I do during the day. In the day, I might be scurrying along, but yeah, absolutely. If I'm alone on a dark street at night, I walk with a certain wrestler's plod.
Oh yeah, my phone's in my pocket.
Yeah, totally. And, but just like a certain heaviness of foot that implies that I might know what I'm doing with my body. Because
the random nature of violence that is a risk is ever present.
And not having guns in Australia, you're basically going to get, you're probably going to get punched or knifed.
And
so
it's not fun for anyone.
You want it, but you want the other person to think that it's not going to be easy.
So I guess, in the context of the little boys in our lives, I would like to say that if we can figure out how to help these young men, as they grow into young men, find ways to deal with their emotions and their big feelings and their physicality, which will, thanks to genetics, possibly, usually most of the time, become bigger and much more powerful.
Transphobic.
Than the... Fuck you. I went to school with kids who are as big now as they were when they were 14.
Yeah.
And so here you are, you've
got a brick shithouse with the brain of a monkey.
Exactly. You've literally been given the keys to a Cat D9's fucking bulldozer with not even a learner's permit. And you absolutely don't understand that you can go through walls and hurt people quite easily because of the size of you now. But you don't have any idea how to control this physicality. And it's super important that what we do with our young men is allow them, because ultimately we're going to get to this point where if we can help these guys to deal with their big feelings and deal with their, physicality and be expressive masculine in a healthy way, masculine way, when it comes time and when they're in a conflict and when they're like really fucking frustrated, fingers crossed, violence won't be the thing they choose.
Do you ever wonder that this is a bit of a privileged conversation that we're having, in the sense that the reality is that you and I will raise sons who will be hyper cognizant of their own...
Man, I don't know, like any
own
kid...
danger, because we will have conversations which I already have with my son about you cannot resort to physical violence.
Yeah.
For me, it's not necessarily a gendered thing yet, but I guess it will be once he's a teenager. But that is being embedded from a very young age. There are communities in this country who are not inculcating that message necessarily. Like, I don't want to say that it's a class thing, because there's more than our fair share of domestic violence amongst rich shitholes as well. But there are just certain types of families and certain types of men who do not think that it's a terrible thing to be violent, and don't think that it's always the worst thing in the world to slap a woman. Those people are the people who need to... Have you met them? Because I've never met one.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the women who say that we need to do better, what they're actually saying is we need to make a concerted effort to find those guys and bring them over to our way of thinking. Now, the problem is, I think that the women who say men need to stop killing women are actually ignorant of how rare it is for us to come in contact with anybody who is violent towards women. I mean, I've never, ever in my entire life, ever been in a social situation with a bunch of blokes where one of them has made light of being aggressive towards a woman or confessed to anything like that. No, I don't know that no one I've ever met has, but no one I've ever met has expressed the opinion that it's okay, ever, anywhere.
Yeah. And it is I would say to you that you mentioned that our sons are largely, and that you mentioned the privilege. I've been in enough sobriety meetings to know, and I've seen it happen with my own friends, to know that any teenager is the right summer, the right song, the right song, and the wrong friends away from throwing everything their parents have taught them out the window and choosing a completely different set of values. So yeah, he came from a good home is a trope for a reason, because it can all shift like that. So,
but then what does it mean to say men need to do better?
I don't know, man.
I mean, if you're at the whims of the right song, the right summer, and the wrong friends,
it would be. I don't know, man. I don't have the solution, but I would say that perhaps it is, considering how we view violence in our community and how.
But who's saying violence is good?
The cohort that you just mentioned of, I
suppose the wrong friends are the ones.
The wrong friends. And that largely is that is a generational thing as well. There's men in my life, men close to people in my life, I should say. There's men close to people in my life who their adult lives, these men in their 50s, their adult lives are absolutely ruined because of horrendously abusive fathers, okay? And there's nothing to say that those men were abusive outside the home. But these guys, hurt people, right? These guys would probably abuse themselves, right? This idea of it's a much I guess what I'm saying, it's a much larger thing. It's than whoever painted the sign might be making out.
Yeah.
Because it's a simple thing to say. It's fun to say, stop the boats. Right, there we go. Well, did you really address the incredibly difficult problem of what's actually happening with 3 words? Probably not. It's easy to say. You can put it in an ad, put it on a trophy. You can win an election, but it might not be the answer.
Yeah. I mean, it can also just be facile, right? I mean, stop killing women is facile. It's not serious. You're not being serious when you're saying things like that, in my opinion. You are, it's sloganeering.
Yeah.
It's like saying of the war in Gaza, stop the killing. Well, who doesn't want to stop the killing? I mean, with the exception of Hamas and perhaps the most psychopathic reactionary Israeli, far-right racist, everyone wants to stop the killing.
Yeah.
Like, thanks for enlightening me about how killing is bad, whether it's of Gazans or of women. The generational point that you made is interesting in the sense that there are 2 possible meanings of generational. There's the intergenerational trauma, right? That as you say, hurt people and hurt parents can be abusive towards their kids, and that can be then ripple out in other dysfunctional ways and violent ways. But then there's also the question about generational attitudes towards the sexes. This comes up quite a lot where, there was an article that I read out on that monologue that you were talking about that I released on this podcast, the one about the problem with the way we're having the conversation about male violence, which was articulating a pretty common point of view about male violence against women, which is that it starts with the sexist microaggression and it ends with a woman's body in a river. It begins with you manspreading on the subway train, right, and not respecting women's space, or implicitly assuming that the female in the household should do more of the work around the house, the household chores, and it ends with the bruised and battered face of a woman. This, I think, is fallacious. It may work in reverse. It may work. It's a bit like pot being a gateway drug to heroin. People would always say, well, 95% of heroin users started with marijuana. And I always thought that was silly because you're looking at it the wrong way around. Of course, to get to heroin, you have to start with marijuana. But almost no people who start with marijuana end up on heroin. Like very, very, very few. Similarly, it's probably true that male murderers started out being assholes. Man-spreading on the train, right? Being domineering in their domestic environment. But it's not true that any significant proportion of man-spreaders go on to become violent towards women. And indeed, generationally, I don't know about your experience, but I find younger males, millennials, can actually be just as sort of actually patronizing and disrespectful towards women, or more so than my grandfather's generation. My grandfather came from a generation that was undoubtedly very sexist in the things that he thought women were capable of doing. Like, he once told me that when his plane touched down he lived in New Zealand, in Sydney, he was like, the pilot came on, it was a woman. Like, that was remarkable enough for him to actually start up a conversation with me about it. He was like, and I'll tell you what, Josh, it was the smoothest flight I ever had. Like, he gets cred. He gets cred by being the nice, patronizing, condescending sexist. It's like women can do real jobs just like normal people can. Anyway, that's all a long roundabout way of saying he would never have raised a finger towards a woman. I mean, there was no suggestion that there was a connection between his old-fashioned ideas about sex and gender, and on the one hand, and any kind of disrespectful, let alone violent behavior towards women. And in the new cohort of guys who are super sensitive and on board with all the right social justice gestures about women, I can sometimes detect a kind of taking for granted of female colleagues. There's not casual sexism, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was just as much violence.
Oh, boy. I was texting you coming out here. I was worried to even come and have this conversation because I'm terrified of how wrong I will already be. And I'm sure since the start of this podcast, there's a long list of things that I've said wrongly. And
why do you care?
Why do I care? I guess there is a part of me, and I've identified this, there is a part of me that doesn't want to be misunderstood.
To hear the rest of this conversation, go to uncomfortableconversations.substack.com/listen, and you will get your own personal premium podcast feed with at least 3 extra episodes of the podcast every month and heaps of extra stuff, including the remainder right now of the fabulous conversation you've just been hearing. If it was worth listening to this much of, don't rob yourself of the rest. Pull out your phone right now and search for Uncomfortable Conversations on Substack.